I'm going to skip my normal intro to throw in a small disclaimer. This video was recorded during last night's live stream. It was my first time ever recording live, so the audio and narration may sound a little bit different. It was a blast though, and I may do it more in the future. I figure I can only get better at it with time, so if you ever see me streaming and it says live reading in the title, feel free to drop by and say hello, ask me some questions, or just listen along. Whatever you want to do, really. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to drop a like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. My friend's family owned a cabin in the mountains. Now my friend, let's call him Carter, was finally able to get a bunch of us together for a weekend away. After a few years separated by colleges across the state, it was good to get the gang back together again, at least in theory. It took 2 cars to get the 6 of us and all of our things up there. Carter was driving the lead car with Logan and Ray. I was the driver of the following car, with my girlfriend Joanna and our friend Sam. We pulled up to the cabin as the sun had already set over the horizon. Given the time of year, well, we had expected the sunlight to leave us early. We'd messed up a little on the exact time of our arrival. We unloaded the car breakneck speeds, all to avoid the incoming dark, with only the lights from the streetlights that were partially blocked from the road. It would soon be difficult to see, not to mention it was cold as all hell. Once everything was inside and the cars were locked up, we made a grand meal for our first night. The cabin itself had a gorgeous interior with a fireplace, a fully renovated kitchen and dining area, a comfortable living room with 2 couches and a recliner, and a back porch that led out to an expansive yard. Upstairs was an array of bedrooms, and then there was the small attic which sat at the top of it all. Although we likely wouldn't be spending too much time in the cabin, it was such a nice place to just sit back and relax when we really needed it. The next morning, later than any of us intended, Carter and Sam led our small group through the trails. Although it was cold, there wasn't any call for snowfall. Even so, the noise of crushed half-frozen foliage, branches, and grass was hard to ignore. We'd stop every once in a while to talk to other hikers, or take pictures of the views or just settle down for a snack. Unlike the others, I took pictures as we walked. Mostly candid photos of the group, or the scenery in motion, rather than anything posed. At one point, we sat on a few rocks that gave us a nice view of the stream below before we'd made it back to the cabin. I was half listening to their idle conversation as I sat leaned up against Joe, going through the pictures I'd taken. Most of them weren't bad, so I started to show the others. They were passing the camera around, going through the pictures, and commenting on what they saw. Micah? Ray spoke up, a tone of urgency in his voice. He looked over to me with wide eyes on colorless features. You didn't look at them all, did you? I shook my head. Look at this, he said, holding out the camera to me. Sitting up, I took the camera from him and tried to see what caused all the commotion. At first glance, the image looked like one of the other dozens of candid group shots. Then I saw it. My heart leapt into my throat, and I felt my whole body go stiff. There was no way that all 6 of us missed something like that. It was just beyond the tree line, in the darkness offered by the shadows of the thick trees and leaves. The thing was humanoid, but it seemed too lanky and disproportionate. Any of its other descriptive features were difficult to make out, due to the camera's focus being on the center of the group, who happened to be Sam at the time, rather than the tree line. What I could make out, though, didn't make me think that this thing was human. The image, as grainy as it was, struck me with a sort of primal fear that made my heart hammer violently against my ribcage. What is that? Joe's voice sounded terrified, as she struggled to get the words out properly. I'd never heard her voice break like it did in that moment. That sense of fear only made my own fear all the more present. Nobody saw it? I sighed, looking to the others. There's no way we'd see that and just keep walking. Carter said after taking a look at the image. Nobody had any theories. They all just stayed silent, and I felt frozen for a moment as my mind tried to get a grip on what was going on. It could have been a trick of the light, or some sort of image malfunction. After all, the camera was an old one, which was the whole reason I took it out on the hike in the first place. Which I reminded the others of this fact. They all seemed to relax a little. Still, we packed up and took another path back to the cabin. This one took a little longer than before, so we ended up back later than we expected. Better to be safe, I suppose. By the time we managed to settle down, it was late in the evening. Although we'd worked to distance ourselves from that thing, I know that it was possible. Joe and I rolled over to face one another and went on with a silent conversation in hopes of taking our minds off the image. Somehow we both managed to fall asleep, but as you probably could have guessed, it didn't last long. It was in the early out of the morning that I was awoken by a loud sound that I couldn't for the life of me remember. As soon as my eyes had opened and the gears of my mind shifted into high gear, the memory of the sound had vanished. All I did know was that it had happened, and whatever it was loud enough to wake even a heavy sleeper such as myself. Joe was already upright beside me, looking to be listening intently, as though for a repeat of the noise. Just as I pushed myself up onto my elbows, trying to look around and see what could have been the source, nothing looked out of place, or even odd in any sense. It only made the feeling of terror that much worse. Joe had started to speak, but it seemed that at the very moment she opened her mouth, a terrifying scream broke through the cabin. We bolted out from bed, and never ran as fast as we did, tearing through the halls and bursting into the room Ray and Logan were sleeping in. They were on their feet with Ray standing closer to the door, and Logan standing against the window, seeming to be pressing his hands against it, as though to keep it closed. I ran over to his side, as Joe tried to get the story out of Ray. Carter and Sam just about ran over one another getting into the room behind us. As Ray stammered to tell us what happened, I was focused on the window, and just why Logan was pressed against it in such a way. Especially when his friend was on the other side of the room, struggling to keep it together. The moment my eyes switched to look outside, I fully understood why. My heart skipped a beat as my eyes focused on the creature that surged back into the tree line. While I hadn't gotten that good of a look at it, I did see that the figure appeared to be running on all fours. It made my body go cold all over, and I felt frozen to the spot where I stood. I looked over to Logan, whose features were pale with wide, watered eyes focused intently on the forest. It took Logan a moment or two before he could step back from the window, releasing his iron-tight grip on it. I didn't even realize that I was shaking until Logan rested a hand on my shoulder, trying to steady his own racing heart. I turned to the others to try to get a better idea of what just happened. As it turns out, Ray was awoken by a sound outside, likely the same noise that had caused the rest of us to wake up. As Logan struggled to get up, Ray went over to the window to get a better idea of the animal running around outside. In his half-asleep state, he couldn't even begin to consider the idea that the thing from the picture could have possibly been out there. When he pressed against the window, trying to look out into the darkness, he couldn't see a thing. He said he was so busy cursing as he threw open the heavy window that he didn't at first hear the sounds of branches snapping. By the time he did, it was already too late. There the creature was, just a few feet away from the wall, about halfway into the yard. Ray said it was just standing there, staring at him with dark eyes that couldn't have been natural. The thing had been tall. He guessed almost 7 feet tall, and had gaunt, lanky form with limbs that were too long to fit with the thing's tall form. For what could have been just a second too long, Ray couldn't move. He felt like his whole body was rooted to the floor as fear dug deep into his bones. His body started to shake, and he was unable to control the tremble that coursed through him and made his whole body run cold. When the creature started to move, Ray let out a scream that caused everyone else in the house to bolt out of their beds. Logan's half-asleep state had vanished as he threw the covers off and ran to Ray's aid. slamming the window shut just as the thing had its hand reached through the glass. Logan said that it tried to get inside, though seemed unable to understand how the window worked. It ran off the moment Joanna and I all but broke down the door. Sam stayed with Ray as the rest of us searched around the house to find any traces that the creature might have still been roaming around. The only thing we found was deep scratches along the wall beneath and around the window it nearly got through. Carter tried his best to figure out what sort of creature this thing was, even though he was the reigning outdoorsman of the group. Having spent his childhood in the woods with his father, nothing made any sense, he said. With how Ray described it, the scratches should have been long but shallow given its gaunt form. We searched the perimeter of the property and found no other signs of the creature, so we made our way back. Carter grabbed the gun his father kept in the cabin, loaded it and rested it against the living room wall. We all sat together in the living room, as none of us could bear to sleep even in pairs. I know I wasn't the last to fall asleep, but even I stayed up well into the early hours of the morning. Every time I managed to close my eyes, all I could see was an image of that thing running back into the forest. I can't imagine Ray and Logan got any sleep either. It was about midday when I finally woke up to find that the curtains had all been drawn closed. Scattered around me were the passed out forms of Logan, Ray, and Sam. It must have been one of the others who drew the curtains closed, to let the rest of us get even a few more hours of much needed sleep. I quietly made my way into the kitchen, careful not to wake up the others as I moved. Due to the sudden change in lighting from the living room to the kitchen, my pace was slowed to a stop as I covered my eyes and groaned. Still, I appreciated the light more in all its painful forms. Everything was less terrifying in the daylight. We did our best to keep our minds off what happened, and to do that, we hardly even went near the forest for the day's events. Instead, we spent our time fishing and canoeing in the nearby lake. Although Ray seemed distracted, no matter how hard we tried to keep him included, Logan and myself were unable to enjoy ourselves. After all, Logan and I had a theory that if we faked happiness long enough, it would be real, and we were right. On the other hand, this concept seemed much more difficult for Ray, but considering what we just saw, we were surprised he was enjoying himself as much as he was. At one point, we were sitting out on the small dock at the edge of the water, with a few of us in lawn chairs we'd brought. I was sitting with my legs off the side of the sturdy wooden dock, with my fishing rod in hand, and Logan sitting beside me. Carter on the far side, leaned against the railing to smoke a cigarette, being nice enough to put some space between us and his smoke. Sam was sitting in the lawn chair, playing cards with Ray. Joe had just returned from the cabin with a canister in hand, and poured me a hot drink, before pouring herself one as well. After handing me my cup, she collapsed into her own lawn chair with a sigh. It was so peaceful. Spiked? I set the cup down to sign before leaning back and looking over at a grinning Joe. I thought it would keep you warm, she said. Now I'm no lightweight by any means, but as my gaze lazily shifted across the lake, I could have sworn that the liquor had gotten to me. At least that's what I tried to tell myself anyway. The image was quick, and looked like it had darted back into the bush the moment my gaze caught it. No, I think my gaze was caught by the quick movement, as if it had moved before that. I was snapped back to reality when something started pulling on the previously dead fishing line. With how long my hook had been in the water, it seemed odd that now all of a sudden it would catch something. Setting my drink down, I started to reel the line in, wondering what would be on the other end of it. The others were all focused on me now, as I managed to reach out, grab the line, and tug the object out of the water with force. The scream that tore through my throat was deafening. On the other end of the line was an animal that looked like it had been mangled beyond repair. I nearly threw the entire rod and scrambled to an uneasy standing position. Logan mimicked my movements, and we backed away from the edge of the deck, as the others had nearly overturned their chairs getting to their feet. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears, and I did my best to rationalize what I'd seen. It's not like seeing a mangled animal in the woods was a totally odd thing, but it was in this area of the woods. This was a community area, where there were limits on where people could hunt, and the sort of animals that made their way through. Even this body of water was pretty closed off from the rest of the woods, meaning that the limits controlled it. There was no way that the animal could have been mangled in this community, and dropped in the water to have drifted over to us. Even if all of this was true, that the animal was somehow attacked and dropped into the water, how did it get latched onto my hook and managed to pull? The rod was slipping into the water, and something made me launch over to snag it. Had it not been for Joanna's quick hand gripping the back of my shirt, I might have fallen into the cold but shallow water. It was a good thing that I hadn't, because in those moments, when I was suspended in the air before Joe pulled me back onto the dock, I noticed a figure lurking beneath the surface of the lake. I blinked and it was gone, but its form was undeniable. My footing was off as I pulled back, causing me to land hard at Joanna's feet. The rod clambered onto the wood by my own feet, and, almost relaxedly, I kicked it away as I scrambled back. We all just stayed frozen in our spots, eyes locked on the rod. Mine were locked on the shadow-like figure in the water. I could hear the rapid breathing coming from the others, as they tried to control their heart rates to varying degrees of success. My own breathing was intense, but I tried to slow it not for my racing heart, but for the pain in my throat from the scream. Just as fast as it had appeared, the figure vanished. Although we wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there, we decided to stay one more night in the cabin to ensure that we got home without any sleep-deprived accidents. After all, driving at night in this area was difficult enough, with a group of well-rested drivers. Even if we drove home the next morning tired as all hell, we'd be better off with the sunlight keeping these hellish roads visible. Deciding that the first night of our little vacation wasn't going to be ruined, we sat around the campfire Carter had worked so hard on setting up earlier that day. Although we made s'mores as the night before, we didn't drink liquor, and instead just stayed with a round of hot drinks. That seemed to be the only thing from keeping cold muscles from tensing up any more than they already were. Although the conversation flowed pretty well, anyone listening would be able to easily tell that we were very distracted. Turns out that the thing really was going to ruin our last night of freedom. Slowly throughout the course of the evening, we started to relax a little. Though we were still on guard, we didn't feel the need to constantly look over our shoulders to see if we were being watched. We all knew, or at least we all hoped, that we would feel such a thing, as we always had with other humans or animals. Carter still had his hunting rifle across his lap though, and well, he wasn't clutching it tightly anymore. He was still ready to use it at any moment. That image alone was enough to send a shiver down the length of my spine. About halfway through our little campfire, right after downing the first few s'mores, I had the urge to go to the bathroom, so I headed back to the cabin. But Joanna, the knight in shining armor that she was, decided to come with me. Looking back, it's a good thing she did. I don't know where I'd be now if it wasn't for her protective nature. She was sitting outside, likely against the wall on her phone, as I did my business in the bathroom. While I felt safer with her sitting just a few feet away, there was something gnawing at me, as though to tell me that it wasn't as safe as I thought. I brushed it off as paranoia, but nonetheless finished up quickly. It happened the moment I turned the water off, after I finished washing my hands. To be honest, I think it had been going on before that, but the loud noise caused by the pipes just blocked the sound from hitting my ears. It was coming from just outside the window, and since the bathroom sat on the first floor, I knew that whatever was out there was too close for comfort. My whole body froze and I felt rooted to the ground for a moment. Then I did something I never thought I would ever do, and something that could have easily gotten me killed. I marched over to the window and threw it open with force. The noise echoed through the house, and I heard Joanna scramble to her feet outside before she threw open the door. I wasn't paying much attention to that though, not even a glance over my shoulder in her direction. My gaze was focused on the thing that had leapt back from the window at my sudden movements, and the sounds they created. Instead of scurrying back into the woods, as it so often did, the creature stood up. All the confidence I had mustered up drained from me, causing my legs to go weak. It was tall and inhumanly lanky with the dark, thick-looking skin that Ray had described. There was something about it that seemed unnatural. If I knew anything, it was that this creature didn't belong, and that terrified me more than anything else. The creature's dark, lifeless eyes were baring into mine, and it felt like it was looking right into my core. Go! I managed to tell it with enough force for the sound to reach the creature. My voice had not sounded so broken since the first time I tried to speak in the hospital after the accident. The creature seemed to make a noise, but from where I couldn't tell. It had no mouth to speak from. It made the same noise once more, and this time, I could fully understand what it had said, and I felt a wave of nausea flood through me. "Michael, help me. I need help. He's hurting me." Joanna sprung to life, and grabbed me with one arm wrapped around my neck, and a hand over my eyes. I had no idea what was going on until she was dragging me away, screaming for the others at the top of her lungs. She sounded utterly terrified, and, without looking, I could hear the strain in her voice, as tears likely ran down her cheeks. As before, I had no idea what was happening, but there was no use in fighting her. We got out of the room, and she let go of me to slam the door shut, as the others piled in. "Get your stuff," she yelled to them in the commanding tone that cemented her as one of the group parents. "We're leaving now. I don't care if we all have to take half-hour shifts. We're getting the hell out of here." That was all it took for everyone to run around the house, getting our things together and getting them outside. We left the food we'd brought in the kitchen, and some stray things in the living room, but they were all easily replaceable. Carter brought his rifle on the drive home, instead of locking it back up, and the whole time he was cursing about how he would have to explain everything to his parents. That didn't stop any of us from how fast we were moving to get out of there. I was the last to run out of the building, throwing Carter's bag into the front car before looking back to Joe's car, which sat a few feet away. Her scream was the last thing I heard, before I felt my leg violently tugged out from underneath me. I landed in the snow face first with a dog-like yelp escaping my raw throat. My free leg instantly went out as I tried to kick the thing away from me, terrified to look up, but I had to. My eyes locked on the creature, and its form is something I won't soon forget. It haunts my nightmares to this day. The creature looked more inhuman than ever, with its limbs contorted at angles that would break any normal person's bones in several places. The long arm reached up to me, and before I knew it, the claws reached to my back, but I twisted before they could sink into my skin. Instead, the claws cut my left arm, and while I know I screamed, I can't remember what it sounded like. A loud shot rang through the air, causing the creature's hand to pull back violently. It moved off of me at a slower speed than it had showcased before, but it was able to get back into the tree line as the others had surrounded me. Joe hauled me to the back seat of the car as Sam leaped into the front seat. We got out of there, and Joanna did her best to patch me up. Despite Joe's attempts to keep me awake, I passed out in the back seat of the SUV. I woke up in the hospital a few days later, and the doctor had told me that I was attacked by an animal and shouldn't have been out drinking in such an area. Turns out the others had lied to the doctor about what happened, fearing that he wouldn't believe them and thus wouldn't let them see me. My arm had some serious damage from the creature's attack, leading the doctors to believe that whatever got to me was large and powerful. Even after years of physical therapy, that arm still doesn't function how it used to, but it's become more manageable over the years. What I couldn't shake were the words that the creature had said to me, the ones it used to try to lure me out into the forest with it. They were the same words that my little sister had said to me when the man snatched her from the playground. How it could have known that was a mystery. After all, only Joanna had ever heard about that story. After my time in the cabin, I started to experience things, unnatural things. Shadows in the corners of my room, figures moving about, voices that seemed to come from nowhere, and even kids playing when there were no kids to be found. I have no idea what that thing did to me. The reason I'm finally writing this is because I saw something last night. I think the creature we encountered at Carter's cabin isn't up there anymore. and hasn't been for some time. My daughter is the quiet sort, real polite, says please and thank you. She plays by herself, mostly with older toys. No interest in fancy tablets, or anything battery operated. An old soul, I reckoned. She doesn't even have friends. Not that I think she'd be able to make any if she tried. Don't assume I don't think the world of her. I do, she's just not the sociable type. I always pass it off as a quirk, despite her teachers and doctors expressing concern. But it never bothered me any. She's an independent, I'd say. But they never knew her like I did. The bedtime routine started when she was about 4. I'd tuck her into bed, give her a peck on the forehead, and offer to read her a book. She always declined, mumbling a no thank you before flipping over. Make sure you lock the door, she'd mutter. Weird thing for a kid of her age. But I obliged by throwing off the light switch and clicking the twist lock into place. No nightlight ever. She always liked it pitch black. I'd get changed into my pajamas and robe, read for an hour or two before climbing into bed. Like clockwork. The sound of little feet pitter-pattered down the hallway. I smiled. She always came alive at night. She'd climb into bed with me, hold me tight. Sometimes we'd exchange stories and jokes. Sometimes I'd read to her. Sometimes we just laid. Her head in my lap as I twirled her chestnut curls around the end of my finger. I loved these nights, cherished them. Held on to them as my most treasured memories. But it all changed about 3 days ago. It was getting late, and she really needed to get to sleep. I gave her a kiss, told her it was time for bed, but she wanted to stay up longer. Why she would reserve her tantrums for me alone in the middle of the night escaped me. But this particular time I had had enough. I grabbed her little hand and marched her down the hallway. She dragged her feet, tried to free herself from my grip. I refused. I regret that now. Mom, I can't. She screeched. I rolled my eyes. Why not? Because it's in there, she said with a whisper, her eyes pleading with me. This was ridiculous. She's always been a sensible child. She picks now to question that sensibility? What is? She was quiet for a moment, her little face scrunched up in worry. She motions for me to bend down, and I do as she cups her hand to my ear. The thing that puts on my face and acts like me during the day. As soon as the words tumble from her mouth, the click of a door unlocking ricocheted down the hall from behind us. Now, I don't know what happened after that. Truth be told, most was a big blur. Like someone scrubbed at my brain with a giant toothbrush to erase any trace of information. Next thing I know, I'm waking up the following day in bed as if nothing ever happened at all. But needless to say, whatever transpired, I am only sure of 2 things. 1, my daughter doesn't visit me at night anymore. And 2, that whatever that thing is sitting behind me, watching me type this to you through hooded eyes, that's not my child. I'm not even sure it's human. I've been a trucker since I was 19. I love the open road. I have been through every state at least a dozen times. Me and my best friend would take turns sleeping and keep old Betsy tugging on. I hauled everything from livestock, lumber, furniture, everything. But that all changed when I got in the wreck. Jim and I were leaving a truck stop in California. It was one of those shirtless bars. Jim ended up buying some pills from some other truckers to help you stay awake. I was extremely tired, so he popped some and decided to drive. I woke up 3 states over to our truck stuck to a tree, and Jim's face smashed into the glass. He was dead on the scene. Apparently, he decided to drink some beer while driving. We keep a case of Budweiser in the back for whoever is in there. And 1 turned to 7. I couldn't find work. No one wanted me. The truck was owned by Jim, and his family sold it once it got repaired. I dug through the papers, and online until I found a trucking ad in the paper. It has a weird name, After Drops. I called the number and was hired on spot. I arranged to meet them at around 3 a.m. The next day, about an hour away from where I lived, so I packed my bags and pulled up using Google Maps. I felt strange that all it was one truck and a tiny shack. A man in overalls stepped out and walked over with a smile. I stared at the truck. It had USB boards surrounding it and had a big lock on the back door. Is this truck legal to drive? Yes, Jethro. Welcome to After Drops. We have a headquarters but figured this was a fine area. So your instructions are to follow Route 66. There's a dirt road to the side at a point on the GPS. Once you follow that, you'll be there. You're basically going to let the guy at the stop there do the rest. We'll have transportation for you to get back home. Understand? This is weird as hell. I could have sworn he blinked and had his pupils turn black. But damn it. I'm behind on bills. Yeah. I took the keys and left. Into driving 2 hours, something felt off. I was wondering what was in the truck. I turned on the radio and heard a podcast. Hey John, what's your name again? I heard a crowd laughing. Don't turn that dial, we'll be right back with Guilty Guts on channel 66.5. I turn off the radio and feel uneasy, but I was only 4 hours away from the destination. I decide to stop and get some gas. I come out with a Red Bull and hear moaning in the back. Not just a little bit, but a lot. And groaning for help. Maybe if I drive to an abandoned road, I can pull over and let them out. I'll help them. I drive off and pull over at an empty abandoned mom and pop store. I break the lock and pull the door open. The trailer was full of people. They looked dead, but they were all standing. I felt vomit fill my mouth when I seen Jim's bloody corpse in the back. He tried walking out, so I slammed the door and locked it. These people were meant to go to hell. The company is calling my phone.